Good afternoon. Thank you. Welcome to our second talk on our Diversity and Dialogue series. And I still hear music coming out of the speakers. If you want to help with that, Katie, that'd be great. If I haven't had the good fortune to meet you, my name is Kate Alexander. I'm Associate Director of Florida Studio Theater and leading the Diversity Dialogues with a very special steering committee that I'll tell you a little bit about. Tonight, or this afternoon, this talk will take place over a little over an hour. The first 30 minutes we will be talking together, and then we'll go to a Q&A where your questions will guide how our discussion moves forward. This dialogue is a little bit different than some of our other dialogues, which have been more externally directed. Social consciousness issues, institutional issues. But what's very exciting to me about this talk is that we're going to ourselves, the masks we wear, and how we internalize masks, and how our divisions came to be. So I look forward to this talk. I would like to introduce now someone very special to our whole diversity program, and that is Chief Judge Charles E. Williams. I need to say that the judge started with us in 2010, and on the play Race by David Mamet, where we started opening up dialogues and really delving in diversity. Since then, he's been the chair of the steering committee and a guiding force on both our tone of the talks, the content of the talks, our online forum. He has posited the questions and been a real leader in the whole way Florida Studio Theater has opened up to the community. So thank you very much, Chief Judge, and I'd like to turn it over to you to introduce our guests.
All right, thank you very much, Kate. I appreciate that introduction. At this time, I'm going to ask our panelists to come forward. I'm going to ask Dr. Eddy Regnier, if you'd come take a seat next to me. I'd also ask Paul White, if you'd come forward. And Shane Taylor. And Eric Hoffmann, come forward. And before I get to the introduction of the panelists, I do want to recognize one of our steering committee members and the mayor of our great city of Sarasota, Mayor Willie Shaw. Mayor Shaw. To my right is Dr. Eddy Regnier. Dr. Regnier is a PhD. He was born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and is a naturalized United States citizen. He is the founder and president of Assessment and Psychotherapy Services. His areas of expertise include psychological assessment, diagnosis of psychopathology, psychodynamic, and behavioral-oriented psychotherapies, multicultural issues, and forensic psychology, and he's also a very good friend of mine. Next to Dr. Regnier is Shane Taylor. Those of you who have seen the play recognize Shane as the actor playing the role of Shepard Mallory. Shane is happy to be back here at FST after appearing in last season's production of Fly, which was a fantastic production. And we're very pleased to have Shane back here. You know what? And to my right, actually, is Paul White. Paul White is a clinical social worker and psychotherapist. Paul is in private practice serving children, families, and adults. About 1/3 of his practice is devoted to the retirement age population, so you'll have a lot of fans here tonight. And let's see, I did Dr. Regnier, and now we have Eric Hoffmann. You should be able to recognize Eric if you have seen the play. Eric is the actor playing the role of General Benjamin Butler. He has appeared in Florida Studio Theater's productions in the past, Over the Rainbow and Through the Woods. He's a New York-based actor. He also directs and teaches and he most recently appeared as Bob Ewell in Orlando Shakespeare's To Kill a Mockingbird. So welcome our panelists.
We're going to start with a reading of the poem, The Masks We Wear, written by Paul Laurence Dunbar just after the turn of the century. Thank you. That's okay, that happens. It's a good wake-up call for all of us to take a moment and turn off ourselves. Thank you so much. No problem at all. No problem. So Shane's going to do a reading. It was an inspiration for also working on the play, an inspiration for many to come at the turn of the century, and we'll talk about that later. But Shane, if you would open up and read the poem for us, please.
We wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile. With torn and bleeding hearts we smile and mouth with myriad subtleties. Why should the world be overwise in counting all our tears and sighs? Nay, let them see us only while we wear the mask. We smile, but oh great Christ, our cries to thee from tortured souls arise. We sing, but oh, the clay is vile beneath our feet and along the mile. But let the world dream otherwise. We wear the mask.
Written right at the turn of the century, and I think one of the first times an articulation about a mask. Dr. Regnier, I'd like you to lead us off on this poem.
First of all, what a wonderful reading.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate
What a great
that.
voice.
Thank you.
I felt myself being hypnotized by you.
Oh, wonderful.
And Dr. Ray, I'm going to ask you to get the mic a little closer.
Okay. I am going to expand on this idea. I think that the human race has worn masks from the most ancient times. And what this poem doesn't say is that we wear masks even for joy. It's not always sorrow. We don't want people to know when we're happy. We don't want people to know when we're thoughtful. We don't want people to know what's in the inner soul. And so we all carry a bag of masks that we wear for different occasions. The problem becomes when we lose track of our mask or when we have none at all. When we have no mask at all, we're called mentally ill. Whole other question.
Paul, do you want to add on to that at all?
I think that there's an aspect to the human condition where we all wear masks out of fear that we will be found out, that there will be weaknesses or vulnerabilities or difficulties in handling things that we don't want the outside world to see, and so we cover it up with a facade. We also wear a mask when there's some inherent danger that we don't want to admit or we don't want to face up to. In my business, in doing psychotherapy, people come in all the time with that discrepancy between how they really feel and how they present themselves to the world. And that discrepancy is part of what we try and deal with in terms of achieving some kind of new balance so that new possibilities can emerge for the individual that becomes more fulfilling and more satisfying. In the context of our discussion here today, I think that the wearing of masks, as we may talk about it in terms of issues of diversity, still exists, and that anxiety or that difficulty in bridging that sense of connection when there are differences is still a big issue for us to reckon with and to figure out how to resolve.
I'd like to sort of start with the play in terms of the mask that slaves had to wear during those times, and probably the best person to direct this question to is Shane. And Shane, can you tell us or give examples during the play when the character that you play wears a mask or has a mask in terms of his real personality versus what he is showing to the person?
Sure, Judge Williams. I would first like to also add on to what these gentlemen said as well. I love that the topic of the talk is that we wear the mask because it just suggests a sense of inclusion, and I mean, in regards to wearing the mask, I think it's a different experience when we're talking about the African American experience as opposed to the dominant culture's experience. And I think it's important to note that in regards to the African American experience historically, that it's directly tied to this idea of survival. And so I just wanted to make sure that that got said. Also, in regards to my character of Shepard Mallory, I think this is a gentleman that knows himself very well. He knows his oppressor, at least how his oppressor thinks, very well. And he also knows his environment or the world that he inhabits very well. And because of this, he's informed enough to know that if he doesn't evolve, that he may not exist. So his idea of using these masks throughout the play is directly tied to his survival. And there's quite a few examples within the play, in the script, where Shepard decides to wear a mask in order to get what he needs, whether that be an answer of yes or just simply to not be struck by his superior in the room. I just think it's very, and because of that, because of his ability to adorn these different masks, as an actor, it just makes it a very exciting experience to go into because this is a character that gets to show so many diverse sides of his personality. Some, of course, authentic, but some also created from his imagination. But yeah, there's a number of examples within the script that he decides to adorn a mask.
And Eric, I was wondering whether or not from your character's perspective, we talk in terms of mask as it related to Shepard, but can you also relate to masks that were worn by whites, including your character, General Butler?
Well, for me in this play, one of the first things that Butler sees in Shepard Mallory is, he accuses him of it. You are a collection of contradictions. He sees in him the arrogance and the attitude and the fact that he's brash and wary, and he's putting on all these facades right there in front of Butler. And one of the things that's I think very interesting about Butler is that he sees that in him, and one of the things he learns very, very quickly is that Shepard Mallory sees that in Butler as well and says, no, you're doing the same thing. You are as arrogant as I am. Even though you call me arrogant and obnoxious, you're arrogant and obnoxious too. And I don't think Benjamin Butler was ever used to that. And so I think that's one of the things that makes him hit it off with Shepard Mallory that quickly, is that, all right, here's a man who speaks his mind. I see that he's wearing a mask, but he's also presents me with his truth right off the bat. And I think Benjamin Butler admires that immensely in Shepard Mallory. And I think that is the bond that then builds the story in the play of, okay, and as somebody who's this brave to and knowing the reality of the situation, no African American would ever behave like this, or certainly would never have behaved like this to Benjamin Butler before. And And Benjamin Butler can't help but admire that immensely in Shepard Mallory.
I was just going to add, like, one of the things that's so, I think, remarkable about the relationship between Butler and Shepard is that Shepard gets to learn who he really is beneath the mask on the journey of the play. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about getting to play, with you, Eric, on stage every night. It's like you just get to dig a little deeper and get to know a little bit more about the character through another character. It's like looking in a mirror almost, as you said.
I have a question. I think Paul and Dr. Regnier, you said that masks are, quote, normal. We all have masks. And then Shane, you talked about when the dominant culture has a mask and then the oppressed culture has to adopt a mask to deal with them. Can we talk about those distinctions? I think
Thank you. I want you to take a journey with me. Fantasy. I want you to imagine that in your family, where everyone knows you very well, in your family, that everyone in your family knows when you're happy, when you're sad, when you're scared, when you're sexually excited, when you're quizzical. Imagine what they would do with that information. If they knew anytime you felt this way, they knew it instantly. Now take that journey for a moment, and now take it to your place of employment. If everyone at a moment can look at you and know exactly every feeling, now imagine taking that to the street. Imagine taking that, you're in a room full of black people or Chinese who could look at you in a moment, know everything you're feeling, exactly how you're feeling. We're accurate about that. If you can do this, you can understand the need for masks. Because if people could do this, they could manipulate you in ways that you can begin to imagine. And so from the ancient times, when we were perhaps smarter and wiser, we wore masks all the time, and we wore them visibly. We painted our face. We put wooden masks on. We understood this, as this is something you had to guard. So masks are a necessary part of life. You have to have it. You don't want your kids to know if you're scared. It may not be appropriate for them to know. You don't want them to know if you're excited about something, that you're ready to buy this thing that they want. You don't want them to know that. You want to withhold that information. And so we wear masks. The mask of everyday living. Now, if you are a member of an entitled group, you have masks too. They're just more grander. The feathers are brighter. They're bigger, heavier to carry. And then you're invested in those heavy masks to carry that grandeur mask. If you're a slave, your mask is smaller. But you imagine them one day to be bigger. And so this is the battlefield that we all confront. And we have to have these masks. Because the truth is, if we don't have them, wow, the things that could happen to us. And so, conscience makes cowards of us all.
If I could interject, doesn't it, without them, wouldn't we feel naked? And God, how terrible is that? I mean, it's the actor's nightmare. The actor's typical nightmare is being on stage and all of a sudden discovering that you're naked and you got nothing to hide. But, I mean, that's my question. I mean, it's...
To be stripped, yeah. I mean, that's the ultimate fear. Even when we're naked, we're wearing masks. Even then. In fact, sometimes our partner says, take off your mask. You're not who you present. And sometimes we don't even know who our true selves are. We're so lost in shifting mask after mask, we lost track of who we are. That's when you need a therapist to sort of...
Yeah, what I wanted to, and I think you may have answered it, this is obviously something that may be hardwired in all of us, black, white, brown, whatever. But what are the negatives of these masks? What is it? What do these masks prevent us from doing today?
What a great question, because you're at the heart of it. While masks protect us, sometimes the masks also keep us from learning about each other. We don't know who we are. We live with strangers. We've come accustomed to those masks. We love those masks, and we never know the person beneath the mask. And in that sense, you can live right next to someone and never get to know them. If you introduce race into the mix, you don't even know each other if you're white, and now you have to look across culture and across history and across a history of disparity. And now you don't really want to know, because you don't want to see in the face of that other person what you have inflicted. And they themselves don't want to see it either, because who wants to accept the idea that I've been victimized, that I've been hurt, that I've been minimized, I've been marginalized? Who would want to accept that? So the African American himself create all kinds of masks of grandiosity, that I'm greater than who I am. And so they wear masks in private that they take off when the dominant culture shows up. Then we put on the little mask again so that you don't discover who we are. The complexity of this is enormous. And so we live with strangers because no one will remove their mask.
The other issue is oppression and dominance, and what that causes in an individual. That the play is really an ideal, in my opinion, an idealistic version of communication. It's not really how things are. If Mallory talked the way he talked at that time, and I believe now as well, he probably would have been shot by the adjutant who would come into the room. He would not have survived that day or two that the play took place. And so the communication that went on is as we would like it to be, where there's acceptance and tolerance and flexibility and a willingness to see the other side of something, even if it means you have to give up something in yourself. And we are challenged in this play to look at that, because that oppression still exists in contemporary society. There is still the upper 5% that owns the capital of the country, and the other 95% is in a very lesser position. And that struggle is not just a struggle around diversity, it's a struggle of economics, and it's a struggle of psychology, and it's a struggle of what the social problems of society are and how we're going to manage them. It's extraordinarily complex, but it still very much exists in terms of us having to reckon with that oppression. We might even say that the possibility of getting shot for opposing authority still exists.
I think we can remember you're either with us or against us, which is used to oppress. How are these masks hardwired into us to today? I think people often ask us, well, isn't this the 21st century? Don't we change? How do these collective masks get hardwired?
Since you're looking at me, I'll try to answer your question. But Kate, thank you. The human race, for our entire history, hasn't changed at all. We're still the same genetic material that existed 5,000, 100,000 years ago. We still have the same needs. We still have the same fears. And we have the same issues of how are we going to live together? How are we going to share the resources? How are we going to protect ourselves from uncertainty? Those things haven't changed. And therefore, it is by nature, by the very construction of ourselves, it is hardwired in us, because the earth hasn't changed. The dangers haven't changed. but nor has the joys. The joy of finding someone you truly love, or finding an art or a piece of music, those hasn't changed either. And we need masks for those as well.
I would answer it in a slightly different way. I think that we're hardwired to a separatist experience of life as a kind of survival mechanism that's really hard to overcome. And it takes the repetition of a dialogue before trust and acceptance can come as part of our natural or normal or typical experience. And we don't have enough of that dialogue. As much as Florida Studio Theater wants to create that dialogue, there's only one African American in the audience here tonight. The dialogue isn't yet really occurring. It does occur in the play in the hopes that we can establish that kind of acceptance. But we have a long way to go because it's so unfamiliar to us, and it's going to take the repetition of a new experience over and over again in us having that dialogue, facing our discomfort. And if we don't face that discomfort and have that dialogue in a face-to-face way, then we are still going to live very separately.
I just wanted to ask, doesn't there have to be like a desire, a need for that catalyst of the dialogue to happen?
It's hard to have that desire if you have to give something up.
Can you say more about that?
Well, I think in order for the society to change, for our culture to change, the desire means that there has to be a willingness to have more balance in society. And it's not there. It's there with a certain segment of African American or minority groups like entertainers and sports people and other people who may have money. But by and large, minorities are not having their share of the American success stream yet. And a lot of the conservative thinking is, well, if they worked harder and they did this and that, then it would happen. Sure. Right. But that's just not the way it is. It's a myth.
Anyone, Dr. Regnier, did you want to add to that?
Sure. I think just because African Americans are not in this audience doesn't mean the dialogue is not taking place. And in fact, it is taking place. And what better place to have that dialogue except for the professional mask wearers, actors. They're the ones society is giving permission to wear their mask openly, not just to wear their mask, but to let other people that know they're wearing a mask. Because the mask of this play is that this is a play, therefore not real, so we don't have to be so defensive against it, which then allowed the actor, through their mask of the play, because the parts they play is not them, there's somebody else. But through that play, to talk to us in a way that's non-threatening, that's acceptable, and then we can talk about it. And that discussion gets to be seen on this stage, other stages, all over the place. And whether you're white or black when you see this, because we've given each other license not to be defensive to the actors, we hear it. In fact, there's a lot going on in music. Look at the impact of a Super Bowl game and a woman who wiggles and the dialogue that she's generated. Look at what Stacey Dash, what she generated through comments on Fox News. And so very much the dialogue is taking place, and it's taking place loudly everywhere. This is just a different one and a different arena, but we are all talking.
I'd like to go back to the play itself and talk a little bit specifically about Shane's role. Shane is a modern African-American man playing the role of an enslaved man. I'd like, number one, to know what it means to you, and then also, is that role and that character relevant to what's going on today, and if you could just sort of expand on that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a challenge to play Shepard Mallory because it challenges you to go back and reflect on your own history, and it hasn't been a bright history. I think it feels at least very contemporary. So because it feels so contemporary in terms of the experience of inhabiting the role and also how the role is written, it doesn't feel Shepard Mallory's experience doesn't feel too far away from my own experience. And I'm not trying to, I guess, compare my own experience to Shepard's, but even though this play takes place in 1861, there's still, atrocities and challenges that I face today as an African American male in society. So definitely I could draw parallels to Shepard Mallory's struggle and his journey to young people today who are heavily involved in the Black Lives Matter movement's journey as well. So it does feel very, very present. It didn't feel as if I had to reach too far away from myself to inhabit and play this role.
To add on to that, one of the things that so struck me about the play is becoming aware of the genius that it took to survive. The millions that didn't, and the few, let's say even a Robert Smalls, they were geniuses, Frederick Douglass. Watching the different ways that you had to act in order to gain power. We all remember characters like a Stepin Fetchit character who would walk slow or talk slow. Well, white dominant culture began to think that was sort of that person, but it really wasn't. We now know it was an act of defiance, an act of rebelliousness to gain some power over our circumstances. I'm exhausted, I'm tired, I can't walk that fast, I have worked too hard. If I walk slower, I can gain milliseconds of time for myself to develop an authentic identity. Not much different than people experienced in the Holocaust. What they called milliseconds of sanity, where they carved out sluices of time. And yet the dominant culture started to address them as slow or stupid or not bright. And I think where this play takes a leap forward is showing that kaleidoscope of what a person had to do if they were enslaved just to survive.
What I'd like to do, and I'm going to ask Dr. Regnier to specifically talk about that, there's certain scenes in the play where obviously the mask that Shepard wears is a survival mask, such as when it's discovered that he can read and his reaction. And I'd ask Dr. Regnier, we know that there are long-term psychological impacts studies about slavery and its lingering effects. Do African Americans wear these masks today? And if you could give us some examples of those masks, and how are they a survival mechanism still today as they were back in 1861?
Excellent question, Judge. When faced with a superior force that can kill you at will, maim you at will, take your family away, sell your children, beat you to an inch of your life and then stop. When that superior force also can be gracious, can be kind to you and give you and feed you, you're left with an enormous question. You have to court that superior power so that you can get the things that you need to survive and also for your group to survive. And if you live that your entire life and you teach that to your children to survive, and they in turn teach it to their children to survive, what must you do? Psychologically, you have to hold back any feelings, anger, pride, joy. You can't see that. I hear this in the black community. I have friends who tell me, Eddie, you dress too well. You want to bring attention to yourself. If white people see you dressed like this, they'll take away what you have. And you know what? They can. Very easily they can. And I see this all the time. To this day, if you think that some Negro is too uppity, some Negro thinks too highly of himself, suddenly contrast can be gone, invitations can be gone, and so all the Negroes, including myself, we walk with our heads bowed. Don't be too proud. Don't let them see this. Don't show too much talent. Don't bring too much attention to yourself, because in a heartbeat, they can make everything go away, because they control everything. And you hear this to this day. In the past, it was even more so the truth. In the past, a uppity Negro, an uppity black person, could not only could their wealth be taken away, their income taken away, their titles taken away, their lives could be taken away. And more so, their children could be taken away. Their wives could be taken away. And so the fear that they had was primordial. It is a fear that I better behave, not just for myself, because I'd tolerate you killing me in a heartbeat. But could I watch you do that to my child, or to my wife, or to my husband, or to my neighbor, or to my best friend, which was also on the chopping block. So all of us learn, boy, walk slower, bow our heads, smile, because a smile says that I accept you and that I think you're good. Tell you how wonderful you are, boss. You're so smart, boss. You're really, really smart, but you should really go that way. You should really invest in this one, but you're so smart. Don't take my comment to heart. I don't know anything, but I think you should invest in this. So we all learn to play the game.
And perhaps the most important example of that is Black Lives Matter as it relates to dealing with law enforcement encounters. And you have two sons, and I would ask how you share your experience when you tell them how to encounter a police officer, or what happens when a police officer is encountered that's different than perhaps someone with two sons who are white, if you'd share that.
Well, absolutely. I'll start by sharing a personal experience. On this particular day, there was a event going on in Sarasota in which there was a jogathon going on. People were jogging and the streets were blocked off. And I and a white friend went to watch this. And we were in a car, and I was the driver. When we got to where a street was blocked, we waited just like everyone ahead of us waited. And as the runners went by, they opened the roadway and let some people through. Then as runners approached, they would close the roadway again. So finally, it was the officers, me, a white guy, and myself in the car. One officer waved to me and said, "Come on." He parted the barriers. As I proceeded across the street, the other officer across the street saw a runner. He changed his mind, and he wanted me to back up. But by then, there was a car behind me. I couldn't. He started yelling at me. "What's wrong with you? Back up!" He screamed. And I said very politely, the other officer waved me on. I didn't see the runner. "I'm sorry, but I can't back up." Oh, he was screaming so much, foam was coming out of his mouth for me to back up. My white passenger started yelling at him, "What's wrong with you? Can't you see what's going on? Who do you think you are? I want your badge number." My heart started beating so fast, it was in my throat. I could see this officer reaching for his gun and shooting. But here was the difference. I was cognizant of the fact that my white partner was not afraid. He always knew he was a man. And this white officer was going to respect the fact that he was a man. And I knew I was not a man. And if I made too much protest, I could be eliminated. And in the morning news, there would be Regnier, who acted out of control, who was a madman, history of violence. He once in 1842 held a joint. And therefore, he's a villain and he needed to die. That's what the newspapers would have said. My white partner would have survived. And so I was trying to get him to calm down. So when I talk to my children, it is like this. Son, I need you to survive. If they beat you, if they strip you of your rights, say nothing. Because if you object, if you say, I have rights, I am protected by the Constitution of the United States, I'm a citizen of the United States of America, they will shoot you, and you will be dead. And in the morning, I will prove them wrong that you are a citizen, but you will be in a morgue. So I'd rather have you live, have them beat you, and in the morning, I'll come running. Because I have friends, I have connections, I'll come running, and I'll get them to release you. We'll take you to a hospital, we'll treat your wounds, but you will be alive. And my sons say, Dad, because they grew up in Sarasota, they think they're a man, thinks he's a man at age 17. But Dad, I don't have to do this. I have rights. I say, son, you do have rights, but I don't want you to be dead right.
I've never had to say that to my son.
I have to say that to myself.
Shane, do you have anything to add? Does that sound familiar to you?
Oh yeah, it definitely sounds very familiar. Just in dealing, in everyday life in the community, and I'm a product of the inner city, so I'm very familiar with, the rules of the game in regards to dealing with figures of authority. But it's very interesting to me that there are times when we wear these masks, we are very conscious of it. But then there are other times when you don't know. There are times when I find, even to this day, where I find I take the bass out of my voice when I'm dealing with certain situations because I don't want to make anyone else feel uncomfortable. You know what I mean? There's times when if I'm dealing with a police officer, even if I'm just approaching or asking a question, I take my hood off, I take my sunglasses off. It's very complicated. It's very complicated. Yeah.
What can we do? What can we do when we interface with each other to give permission? Take it outside of the police, which is but between each other. What do we do?
As a therapist, I have people angry in my office all the time. They're yelling and screaming, and they're having to get it out, because without getting it out, there's no possibility of any other kind of resolution. And your question is a really hard question because it goes countercultural in the sense that we want blacks to be less angry. We don't want them to be powerful. And so we don't want to hear a whole history of resentment and injustice. And we certainly don't want it projected onto us as individuals because we're not racist and we're not in that same group as the other people. But we do have to learn to accept and receive that anger. And I don't think contemporary society is willing to do so. And that's why the problem continues to exist, and that's why your question is such an important question. What do? We have to face that anger. White society has to face that anger and face that injustice and know that it's true and it's still happening. We don't do that.
One parallel that we could look at is the Holocaust. Germany has been a leader, knowing that the seeds of hatred was sown there. They have educational programs. They have museums everywhere. If you've been, of course, so many, the Holocaust museums everywhere. They've educated their public. The public took responsibility, and the government demanded with apologies. The churches apologized. The Vatican apologized for sending 11 million people to their death, and have taught the public. Yet our cultural, we've just opened our first, or we haven't even opened it yet, the Smithsonian's Museum of African American Culture. There's only one museum in Louisiana that is a museum for slavery, and yet culturally, it's not only individually, but the larger culture needs to understand this in context. Because you hear people say, move on. Right. But you wouldn't have said that in Germany, move on.
I briefly talked to Dr. Regnier about some criticisms of not just panel discussions, but discussions and dialogues about race. And the question that many people have is, why are we still talking about this? Can't we talk about something else? Can't we move on? It's over. You know, my family didn't own slaves. I'm from New Jersey. I don't know why people are resentful. And I'd like Dr. Regnier to explain why it's still important that these issues be addressed and that we discuss them.
I think that if you're a member of the dominant race, and your families had the power for generations, then it's a really easy cop-out, isn't it? There's not a problem. Why don't we just move on? What's wrong with you people? Why are you stuck? And the problem seems to be your problem now. It's not my problem, because I'm not racist anymore. You can move on. And if you're stuck, you have a problem. It's easy if you're a member of the dominant race. It's not so easy if you're a member of the oppressed race, because then you don't have an equal voice. In fact, isn't the struggle now, is the people who control the mass media can keep people out, can keep African Americans out, can keep out who gets to be heard and what discussions are had. And by doing that, you prevent the kind of discussions that Paul White is talking about, that let people express themselves. We are stuck as a race. We're stuck. And we can pretend we're not stuck. We can wear a mask of pretense. Or we can choose to take that particular mask off and face the truth. And the truth is, we need to all reach out to one another. And the day that we do that, and we take those masks off and start reaching to each other, we'll learn some truths about each other. And they're not all going to be nice, but we'll also learn some nice truths too. And that's really the tragedy for me, is that it's not that I just want to show anger, because I want to show love. I want to show fun. I want to show what I've learned, and I've learned for so many different places. I have so many discoveries I like to share. And this barrier keeps that sharing from happening. We might find if we drop the barrier, we have really far more in common than not.
That's the point of the play.
Yep, sure.
I'd like to open it up to a few questions, and I know the mayor was nodding quite vociferously throughout this. Mayor, did you have anything you'd like to add? Patrick, are you here with the mic? We'll give it to Mayor.
First, to the panelists and to the questions that were asked, profound, just profound. To the player, outstanding. Yes, we all do. Even as mayor, I too face issues that can bring me down, put me in my place. You don't get too big. You don't get too far out there something you say. Whose toes? In the post office, we had a saying, please be careful of whose toes you step on today, because they may be attached to the behind you have to kiss tomorrow. I know. But when we are brought down, from this place that we are, we see it. I could not help but deal very carefully with the mask. And Dr. Regnier, you really touched something when you said those who think that they have made it have on these masks still. In our culture, we have the boogies, and the bourgeois are those who have made it, and they don't look back to from whence they've come. They've forgotten that place. So these masks are so prevalent until somebody steps on them. I'm going to do this and be through. O.J. Simpson was, no, let's go to a Supreme Court judge, Thomas. And it was really good. I don't know how many of you remember the period where he was questioned and they were questioning him. And his mother spoke out for him, and yet there was one on that panel that says, Judge, did you or did you not? And you could see on his face, you could see him shrink. He was no longer the judge. So we all wear those masks, and until we take the barrier and realize that there's a barrier there. See, so many people don't want to face the fact that there is a barrier, and that pretense. There is no barrier. You have just as much right today to do what you do as I do. Liar, liar, pants on fire. Thank you so very much.
We have time for a couple questions. So this is Patrick Jackson, who works in our Right of Play department.
Stand.
I'd like to ask Dr. Regnier about today's most visible example of someone who is breaking all the behavioral advice that you said you would give to your son, and that's Cam Newton. Which forces do you think will become the prevailing forces in shaping how he moves forward from the turf he has staked out, after the Super Bowl? Well, before, during, and after the Super Bowl.
I celebrate Cam Newton, and as he is known as the Superman, every time he steps out, I watch him in fear, because I know life is going to deal him some challenges. And so that question you asked 5 years from now may be very different. But isn't youth wonderful?
Another question.
First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for your insights, and particularly the two gentlemen on the stage who shared what it's like to be black today. That was heart-wrenching, and thank you for that, because it's so hard for us to understand. What fascinated me in the play was the dance of masks, because Butler is wearing just as much a mask as Mallory is, and is, in a way, as fragile as Mallory. He's, for crying out loud, he's a lawyer, and suddenly he's leading men into battle. And as he admits frequently, these men know more about the battle and are better trained, went to West Point, than he is. The only thing that enables him to lead them is his mask of superiority. And the minute it slips, he will be destroyed, almost as much as Mallory will be destroyed if his mask slips. And you can see in the play how as soon as Mallory lets his slave mask slip, Butler whips on his and blusters and becomes much more arrogant. And then when Mallory puts his slave mask back on, Butler's allowed to take his off and become more human and less the blustering guy who has to defend his position. And I wonder if you see that kind of thing in real life also, because it's just fascinating the way the playwright created that situation where they were both in danger if their masks were seen through.
Okay. Do you both want to answer that? The question is, we saw the masks they both wore. Do you feel that in life as well? Now, today, a switching and a power switching.
Me personally, or the character?
You personally. Do you see it?
Sure. I think there's a facade that we put on. I mean, the mask that we wear in our everyday lives, and one of the things that struck me in your statement there, there's a moment in the play when Shepard Mallory says to Butler, "You'd like to whip me too, don't you? Wouldn't you?" And Butler wheels on him. It's completely unprepared for that question, and yes, he's prepared to do that, and he catches himself in the middle of that going, "Oh my God, I can do that. There's something that dark in me that would allow me to, in that moment, forget the propriety and allow me to go to that dark place." And I think in our everyday lives, I think we find ourselves questioning ourselves or checking ourselves, going, "Ooh, can I think that way? Could I allow myself to think that way?" I've had many, my history of experiences with African Americans is mine. We all have our own, and I've shared some of them with the other actors when we were putting this play together. And some of them are vivid. I mean, when I first went off to college, I arrived at my dorm room, and the person in the neighboring dorm room says, "Hey, have you met your roommate?" And I said, No, I don't know who he is." He says, "He's black." And I said, No, I didn't know that. And he was one of the basketball players on the scene, and apparently one of the people that was supposed to take that dorm room opted out when he realized that his roommate was going to be an African American. And I don't say this to blow my own horn, but I embraced it, and I spent a year living with a guy, and it opened up things to me that I would have never experienced unless I had spent a year living in the same room with someone who was African American, and racism was something that was most vividly confronted when I was off on a tour in Europe doing a play, and we were not allowed to get into a club because my buddy, one of the other guys in the cast, was African American, and the guy at the door says, "No, we don't want any African Americans in here." And I went off like a bomb. And my African American friend had to say, "Eric, relax, man." Yeah, because he had that life experience where I hadn't, and I felt so indignant about it, but I had so much to learn, and I still find that every day, learning.
I have a question down here, Patrick.
Well, I don't actually have a question. Exactly. Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe and maybe not.
If we could form a question, that would be great.
Well, are white people aware of the mask that maybe even if we don't want to wear it, you insist that we wear it? Okay, that's the question. Now, can I kind of explain what is behind the question?
Sure.
Some years ago when I was teaching, I was teaching in high school in New York. In fact, it was 1982. I remember it 1982 because I wrote a poem about it later. It's called The Exception. When you're the exception to the rule, you must understand there is one. But anyway, I referred to myself as black one day. I'm in a predominantly white faculty and maybe 60-40 white to black students. And I referred to myself as black, and this woman said to me, "Oh, why are you calling yourself black? You could be anything." And then she named all of these Hispanic groups. And I say in the poem, you can be Mexican, Dominican, anycan, as long as you're not black. Now that was a mask that she wanted me to wear because I had been accepted as an exception to the rule of who black people really are. And when that mask comes off, and recently it came off, so tomorrow there may be a letter in the Herald Tribune if they publish it. I think they might, because they called me yesterday and said it's 370 words. You have to cut it down to 250, so they may publish it. But it's about the uppity black, and this is what happens to the black who must wear first the exception mask. And I'm in a community where I'm the only black in the community. So first you have to wear the exception mask, even if you don't want to wear it. You know, you got to smell good, talk good, you know, all of that stuff that makes you different from other blacks. And when you get into a dispute with them, as I did, about my flower garden that they pulled up, I don't know if you read about that in the Herald Tribune, and I fought them with intelligence and law and all of this stuff, and oh my God, I was sassing white folks. That's really what happened.
So let me go back to the question.
Well, the question, the question
back, 'cause
is, do white people really understand that? Or maybe if you'd let us, as this doctor, is it Dr. White? Oh, doctor, okay, I'm sorry. He said, you gotta let black people talk. Jim Wallace, in his book, Original Sin, I don't know if you're aware of it, America's Original Sin, Racism, White Privilege, and New America, and that's what he says. You have to listen to black people. I've never been in a situation where white people let me talk about this. All right, I'm done, but that's it.
Thank you. But let's answer that question. Do white people impose as well? Is it self-imposed, and are white people imposing? And I do have to add on, did anybody see the Beyonce thing on Saturday Night Live with her new video? All the white people are running around screaming because they didn't realize she was black in her new video. And they're throwing themselves out of windows in front of cars because she has dared to put out a video where she's really embracing her culture. And the white people are nuts. They're running, they're killing their children, they're throwing themselves out. They go, she's not, which is really your statement. And it's a very clever, and if you can YouTube it, because it twists what you're saying about our impositions on the Caucasian imposition on what a person must look like or appear. And they said, no, she was only white in a comedy movie. Do you want to add?
Well, I do think your point is well taken, because I think that the majority culture imposes on the minority culture what they expect and what the behavior codes are supposed to be. And if you don't comply with that, then there's something wrong with you. There's not something wrong with me receiving it that way. There's something wrong in you portraying yourself in that way. It's a one-sided view. It's not a dialogue to really know what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, to know the whole person. We just want you to be like us. And that's part of the dialogue, you know. And I think when Eddy was talking before about it, not just being anger that needs to be expressed, that it has to be the whole person, you're absolutely right about that. I didn't complete that thought, but you're absolutely right, it needed to be said. And that's the point you're making as well, that the whole person needs to be experienced, and we need to be able to have that kind of dialogue. We don't always have it.
We are actually out of time. Dr. Regnier, I'm going to ask you to close us out. But before we do that, I do want to thank Charles Clapsaddle with METV, who's graciously come in, and all of these will be recast. I want to thank our mayor and our steering committee for being so close and guiding all of these talks. We hope that you'll come back. There are many more going to be going on throughout Alabama Story, which looks at Montgomery, Alabama, 1959, and the rabbit's wedding. So, Dr. Regnier, will you close us out?
I'm going to close this out with a poem I wrote yesterday. See if I can remember it. It's a short poem. What is life except an excuse for love? What is love except an excuse for growth? Why are we afraid of growing?
Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.